A little bit more about genetics and heredity. And we're going to focus on genetics as explained by a very smart man who's called the father of genetics, Gregor Mendel. Okay, let's skip that part. Here we go. So heredity. The heredity is the passing of traits from parents to offspring. Traits are basically the characteristics of an organism. So the color of your hair, your hair type, whether it's curly or straight, color of your eyes, shape of your nose, any physical description. Now, an allele. An allele is where the genes can be found in the chromosome. You receive 2 alleles per major trait, generally. We're going to keep it simple for now. But you receive characteristics from your mom and you receive characteristics from your dad. So let's look at this chromosome here. Okay, let's say allele for phenotype A comes from one parent and allele for phenotype B comes from another parent. Okay, let's say phenotype A is for brown hair and phenotype B is for, oh goodness, I don't know. You choose. It can be for anything. But these alleles determine what your characteristics are going to be. Okay? Maybe one's for dimples, maybe one is for no dimples. Either way, if one is dominant, then that characteristic will show up. That trait will show up. If it's recessive, then maybe not so, unless both of your parents gave you the recessive allele. So, genetics is the study of how traits are inherited through the interactions of these alleles. Let's look at mom's genes. She has the possibility of donating a dominant allele or a recessive allele. Let's look at dad. He has the opportunity to donate a dominant allele or a recessive allele. Okay, if both parents donate a dominant allele, then you will have a kid who expresses dominant traits. If one parent donates a dominant allele and another one donates recessive allele, well, the kid will still show the dominant trait. But parents also have the ability to donate the recessive alleles, in which case the kid will show the recessive traits. And these recessive traits might be a trait that doesn't even show up in the parents. So Gregor Mendel was the first to study how these traits were passed from one generation to the next. And he did this by studying pea plants. Mendel crossed a pure breeding white flowered plant with a pure breeding flowered plant. And you would think that maybe this would cause the flowers to be pink, or maybe some of the flowers would be purple and some of them would be white. But instead, he got all purple flowers. What? How did this happen? But then later he crossed 2 of the second generation of purple flowers, and 3 out of 4 of the flowers were purple, and 1 out of 4 were white. This blew Mendel's mind, and he had to look into it. This is a diagram of a Punnett square. It perfectly demonstrates Mendel's experiment. Now, these 2 purple flowers are a second generation. So they each had a purple flowered parent and a white flowered parent. Purple is a dominant trait and white is a recessive trait. The dominant traits are showed by capital letters. So to show that they have a dominant and a recessive gene, it will have a big B and a little b. So they have a 25% chance of having a offspring that will not have any recessive alleles. But they have a 75% chance, or a 3 out of 4 chance, that their offspring will have purple flowers. They have a 25% chance, or a 1 out of 4% chance, of having an offspring with white flowers that are white, meaning they only have the recessive alleles. So what does this mean? From the results of his second cross, Mendel determined that one allele was dominant and the other allele was recessive. These alleles determined a plant's genotype or phenotype. A genotype is the genes that you have. Maybe you are a carrier for blue eyes, but you have brown eyes. But then later, the gene for blue eyes gets passed down, and wow, suddenly there are kids with blue eyes, and you think, wait, what happened? I have blue eyes, their other parent has blue eyes. How did this happen? Well, maybe both of you had a recessive trait that you passed to your kids. So dominant versus recessive. If you have two dominant alleles or two recessive alleles, we call this homozygous. If you have a dominant and a recessive, we call this heterozygous. Dominant alleles always cover or dominates the recessive allele, and a recessive allele is always covered by the dominant allele, unless no dominant allele is present, and then you can see the recessive trait. So here are some of the examples of Mendel's experiments with the purple and white flowers. He also did experiments looking at the shapes of peas, whether they were wrinkled or round or misshapen. So these representing alleles, we represent them with letters. Like I said previously, uppercase letters equals a dominant allele. A lowercase letter equals a recessive allele. So both alleles must be inherited from a parent, okay? You'll receive one from your dad, you'll receive one from mom. But one of them may not show up if it's a recessive allele. Genotype versus phenotype. A genotype is an organism's genetic makeup, basically the combination of alleles, whether they're dominant or recessive. But the phenotype is the outward appearance or behavior of an organism. So let's say we're looking at someone who has brown eyes. We can tell that their phenotype is brown eyes and that they must be a carrier for the brown-eyed trait. However, do we know if they are a carrier for the recessive trait? Well, no, we can't tell that by just looking at the phenotype. The only way we will know if they're a carrier of the recessive trait is if we look into their genotype, which you can't see with the naked eye. So, once again, as I said previously, a heterozygous is when you have a dominant allele and a recessive allele. Homozygous is when you have two dominant alleles, or homozygous can be when you have two recessive alleles. Okay,